Gen Z is cheering on Elliot from the Next Generation podcast, saying that he ate these panelists and that he was cooking for Gen Z. Now, I am not a Gen Z, obviously, but neither am I against Gen Z. I am a millennial, but I'm also a staunch observer. Elliot is clearly disenchanted due to the mental health crisis Gen Z is suffering from. I'll very briefly comment on the other panelists who do utter some very foolish things, but I'm primarily going to focus on Elliot's statements, because while it is easy to blame other people, the truth is much harder to swallow. Elliot asked for a conversation, a discourse. I'm going to give him an answer.
That Gen Z, because you're all on your phones, you don't get out anyway.
Yeah, and who put together the algorithms that got us addicted? I would argue it's the older generation, and they're now failing to take responsibility for what they've done. We're not the ones who designed social media algorithms more addictive than casinos.
We've got some of the best parks in the world in London. Why can't you use
Thank
those?
God. My depression's cured.
Because he's got a park.
That's probably got dog poo in it that's not been picked up. I mean, seriously, is your solution to this crisis amongst Gen Z's mental health to build more parks? You don't think there's a crisis?
Well, just on this issue, because if we're talking about anxiety and the way that people see their city, there is this very hard narrative, propaganda really, from the right wing coming, that this is a dangerous city where your phone gets snatched, you get stabbed, which just isn't based in reality.
Well, I think this is just super indicative of the discourse in the UK at the moment.
It's all London.
One panellist here who's making it about parks, and then we have another one bringing in the left-right debate, trying to polarise things and push your agenda politically. Can we have maybe a
Better
deeper
to go live in
conversation
South Africa where
about
the death
culture?
rate is,
Did you not leave the story that you got your political education from Constantine and the trigonometry podcast? It's not you that's made it left-right, right? You led that.
When did I make it left-right?
Well, you just said it's about political ideology.
I want to talk about how Gen Z are genuinely struggling here.
Yeah, of course
and you're making it a left-right argument, which I dislike. And this is why I don't do TV, by the way, because it's always snappy headlines and it's trying to clickbait for the sake of pushing an agenda rather than getting to the important conversations. And that's what I'm fed up with. I think ultimately older generations need to take more responsibility, especially in the media space.
First off, let's take a quick pause to talk about that shirt. I used to live in London, and they have some of the best dressed, most dapper men in that city. Hopefully, Elliot finds his own British style in the future, but besides that, he is right about a few things. Okay, so these two panelists, first off, they should make anyone question what makes a credible person these days. She comes in with, "There's parks." Okay. Please make the connection for us so that we don't have to guess, please. Then this other panelist comes in, right, with the classic left versus right game, tribal game. Okay, so it's so out of left field with like the propaganda and whatnot. I mean, it's barely even connected to the actual topic. But when Elliot responds with, "Why can't we have a discourse?" some deeper conversations, he misses the point too. You see, discourse between commentators who produce nothing is just filling a room with hot air. And so because they couldn't give Elliot an answer, I will. See, I have addressed Gen Z before, specifically in a video called Who Failed Gen Z? It is predominantly from the perspective of relationships though. Now, because of Elliot, I will handle addiction. Elliot sounds like he is blaming either his or his generation's depression and Gen Z's social media addiction on the older generation. But first, we must address this corporate monolith called Gen Z and boomers. Are Gen Zs all on the same page? Because I was unaware of that. He says, who put together the algorithm that got us all addicted? And then he says, I would argue that it's the older generation who designed it. Like Mark Zuckerberg? Is he going to blame his generation's problems on the generation before when it is clear as day the tech companies? Because I know that I didn't make the algorithm and I'm a millennial. I know that there's like a set group of people who do this. Yes, would they be older than Gen Z? Yes, but would it be just the whole monolith of a generation? No. So I think that the biggest problem people don't understand, and I am constantly talking about this on my channel, is human behavior. Human behavior has been studied and human nature has not changed. So I'm going to state some things right here that we should all know about human nature. Hopefully they are not things you don't know. Okay? Human beings naturally prefer the path of least resistance. We are wired to seek out the maximum amount of mental satisfaction for the absolute minimum amount of work and sacrifice. Human addiction isn't just driven by a negative desire to escape reality. It's equally driven by a positive desire to chase pleasure. So we have people right now who are chasing pleasure and people trying to escape reality, and some who are chasing both. Human beings are also naturally fascinated by new and shiny things. Tech and marketing companies know this and deliberately design apps with bright lights, vibrant colors, satisfying sounds, and the endless scrolling. Social media apps are engineered exactly like a casino slot machine, delivering sensory tricks that manipulate your brain into thinking you're about to win, and you only do a few times. Right, so it's not just the media. We've seen this in many things right now. Notice how candy is in bright, shiny bags and engineered to attract a child's eye. But vegetables will come in this plain plastic bag. Algorithms are packaged in the same exact way. It's not an accident. It's behavioral engineering, right? We see this also with vapes. They come in fruity flavors. So the science that everyone loves so dearly and worships, and it should be used to help mankind, well, it's not being. It's being used against us. Now, did parents know when they were giving their kids a phone? Did they make the connection to a slot machine or ask why their child seemed abnormally glued to the screen, like they never saw their child glued to a book? No, they didn't. But before you beat up on the older generation and your parents, I would like to explain that this is nothing new. Technology has simply exacerbated our bad behavior and tendencies. So, for thousands of years, mankind chased this exact low-effort pleasure through physical vices like alcohol, and then later there was the heavy drug use introduced in the 1970s. Today, social media and these apps are like sedatives and stimulants combined. It provides the ultimate low-effort, high-reward trap in human history, available instantly, 24/7, and it's right in the back of your pocket or it's right in front of your face at all times. So you think you're fighting a fair fight, but you're up against digital products engineered by behavioral scientists specifically to bypass our conscious choice. It involves a whole lot of willpower. It is a system designed to exploit human biology for a low-effort release. Okay, so this threat, maybe it feels so overwhelming and you're like, oh my goodness. And so a lot of people naturally think and resort to, we should just get rid of it. We just need to ban social media. Well, we have actually tried that exact experiment before. It was nicknamed the Noble Experiment. It was called Prohibition. So presidential candidate Herbert Hoover said of Prohibition, our country has deliberately undertaken a great and social economic experiment, noble in motive and far-reaching. So it was initiated by Christians. They believed that it was a social evil and the root of moral decay. So there were all kinds of groups that sprung up to fight alcohol, but especially the Women's Christian Temperance Union. You've heard of women today talking about how no-fault divorce was the only way out of some abusive marriages. Well, here it is. This is it. It was primarily the women in the church who started pushing for legislation, seeing the devastation that alcohol was having in the home. The domestic abuse primarily of women and children, husbands spending whole paychecks at saloons, which they deemed dens of iniquity, before coming home with absolutely nothing to give to their families. So alcoholism is not new. It was one of the cheapest primary vices available all throughout most of history. So this panel, it took place in the United Kingdom. If you have read any Dickens whatsoever, you will come across the alcoholic gin drinkers. It was a systemic problem in England as well, but they didn't get a prohibition. So they actually got their own set of Christians, a husband and wife, Catherine and William Booth, who formed the Salvation Army, whose social arm you probably know of today, right? William Booth penned In Darkest England and the Way Out in 1890. It was a bestseller for social reform because the East End families were living in destitution from alcoholism and prostitution. So you have alcoholics in the UK, alcoholics in America, but in America, we got prohibition. And now we have a perfect example of what happens when you try to legislate human behavior and morality. So some people think that alcoholism is just a disease and not a moral failing. History would show you something very different. Why did prohibition fail? Because it did fail. Humans failed. People, I guarantee they were like, you take my vice, I take your life. Okay, prohibition did not stop the human desire to escape. Instead, it actually stripped away the legal structures. It forced the entire industry to go underground, though at first the numbers of people dying from cirrhosis had dropped off. Soon they were dying from poisonous ingredients they were using to make bootleg liquor. And then it also birthed a violent black market. This is where we get Al Capone, the mobsters, the families, Tommy guns. But on that note, we also got some really great movies. We've got The Untouchables, Scarface, The Road to Perdition. The Godfather never could have been made, never been thought up because the Corleone family, they got their money from bootlegging.
Okay. Well, what's the matter? Can't you talk with a gun in your mouth? I want you to find this Nancy boy, Elliot Ness. I want him dead. I want his family dead.
So at least we got some entertainment. Not everything is bad. Okay, but if you had this belief in your mind, okay, great. Alcohol is bad. Get rid of it. Drugs are bad. Get rid of it. Cartels and drug mules say what? Let's have a smartphone tea party. Everybody throw their phones into the sea, right? Okay, you could do this. This is how people behave, right? When things don't work, they swing the other way. Well, if you throw your phone in the sea in protest, next thing you know, you're going to turn around and you're going to go, oh man, I got to buy a new phone. But let's say we really did try and shut it down. It would end up birthing unmonitored dark networks, VPN black markets, probably even physical rioting. Why? Because the underlying psychological and or spiritual demand remains untouched. And so that's what happens if you try to end it via legislation. So then your question might be, can it be fixed? And what are our greatest hurdles? This is not necessarily unprecedented. There have been many crises in the world. Right now, I would just say there's a lot of unique factors going on here. And so I want to compare it to the generation of the Great Depression. Look, we're not even as low as the Great Depression yet, which actually happened at the same exact time as Prohibition, but not because of it. We are a deeply, deeply fractured nation. And if we are going to fix this, some good faith actors are going to have to step into the room and remind Gen Z that every single generation before them has lived through hard times. And at the same time, we need to remind older generations how resilience, grit, and community are actually built. Because they weren't born with it. They were forced into it by a brutal reality. And unfortunately, the generation that emerged from the Great Depression is primarily gone. There are still some people here from after World War II, but primarily we have lost those tough generations. I cannot do justice to what the Great Depression was like. Obviously, I was not there, and this is not a documentary. But there are movies like The Grapes of Wrath and Cinderella Man that you can watch. Cinderella Man is actually great because it's a movie about grit. Okay, so we love to talk about trauma. And no one would deny that the children who grew up in the Great Depression had trauma. So there was a man, Glenn Elder, he wrote The Children of the Great Depression. And it's a study, and everybody loves their studies, right? Okay. He separates people by gender, if they were young kids or if they were teenagers during the Great Depression, if they were in a broken home or not, if they had their mother or father or not, to assess the effects of the Great Depression on them over time into adulthood. And so his studies proved that they emerged as one of the most resilient, civic-minded generations in history. So the stability that they lacked in person in their youth, they made sure to build it for themselves when they were older. They wanted to make tight-knit families and communities. Now, the difference is that they had societal and physical guardrails in place that we just don't have today. Right? If you watch those movies, the whole family huddles around like one radio, or they're at their local watering hole to listen to the one radio, the entire community. Physical scarcity had people sharing. They survived together in physical reality. Technology wasn't individualized yet. Everything was very communal. Let's contrast that with today. Gen Z has essentially been programmed by modern therapy culture to identify primarily as victims. There's loads of books, papers, and studies that are being written about the education system, teaching young people to like divide up the world into the oppressor and the oppressed. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, talks about the emotional fragility that was essentially bred into Gen Z. I'm finishing up the book, Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up by Abigail Shriver. And with that, paired with my knowledge of how many Gen Zs that I know personally, who I've worked with, and how they respond to life, one would know that they don't respond well to emotional discomfort, much less physical. So technology has exacerbated these timeless human vulnerabilities, and we have fractured society into an acceptable isolation that previous generations logistically could not have maintained. So they emerged into a system that still didn't have the tech that is keeping us apart today. So to be clear, our problem is that the Depression generation emerged resilient because their crisis was shared in physical reality, whereas Gen Z's mental health crisis is experienced alone, behind the screen. The only camaraderie is in comment sections. So I'd like to make two last quick points, with the conclusion being about getting the government involved because I know everybody wants a solution. First off, in the video, 2 times Elliot demands the older generations take collective responsibility.
Argue it's the older generation, and they're now failing to take responsibility for what they've done. I think ultimately older generations need to take more responsibility, especially in the media space.
But sociologically, Gen Z is the most subjective, hyper-individualistic generation in modern America and British history. So this is what would be called moral free-riding in philosophy. You cannot reject collective duty when it constrains your lifestyle choices, but then demand collective duty when you want older generations or the state to fix your emotional baseline. So they want all of the freedom to reject all of the things that they don't want, but none of the work. So this is the generation of cutting everyone out of their life. Their parents, family, friends, ghosting everyone in the name of protecting one's peace. They are the royals of moral relativism. In a country of individualists where it is everyone for ourselves, we cannot even agree on basic definitions of right, wrong, or duty anymore. Individualism carried to this extreme destroys the very framework required to hold anyone collectively accountable, and then it ends up leaving you trapped in your own acceptable isolation. So when a culture completely breaks apart into isolated individuals, a very predictable shift happens. Isolation turns into helplessness, and helplessness turns into panic. People eventually tire of the chaos of trying to navigate life completely alone, and that is where the real danger begins. Individualism doesn't work to hold society together. The systemic solution must be cultural, not political, because culture should be entirely upstream of the government. This cycle of history has been seen before, though, many times. When things get bleak and people feel helpless, they look for a savior. If Gen Z and commentators like Elliot continue to panic, blame others, and then maybe even beg the government to intervene and fix this cultural decay, which we're seeing in New York City, they are directly inviting an authoritarian regime in. It is not the government's place or in its power to mandate a sense of purpose or provide genuine human connection. It can only restrict freedoms. By demanding a state cure for a cultural sickness, society will accidentally hand the government total control over our digital and personal realities. So as I said, culture must always sit upstream of politics. The moment you ask the state to regulate your internal discipline, your culture, and your personal relationships, you're no longer asking for a solution. You are inviting authoritarianism in. To end on a positive note, the only real option we have here is if a person and/or people arrive to help who will purposefully infringe on your moral relativism and individualism out of a sense of duty and internal character.
Join me on the floor and let's see what you can do. Is it just for show? Say, girl, can that body move?